The detectives on Law and Order will be hitting the streets of Toronto for the very first time tomorrow.
Okay, so what are we thinking?
That alibi has to be fabricated.
Then pull at the seams.
You can't catch what you
Recognize that backdrop right outside Toronto City Hall? That's what you'll see in the new show Law and Order Toronto: Criminal Intent. There's a primarily Canadian cast and crew. The showrunner, the person who's responsible for the show, the top boss, says the show will even use some real Canadian crime headlines as inspiration for the plot lines in the show. There is tremendous amount of anticipation for this one. Eli is here for an exceptional Wednesday visit because Eli has been on set as they were putting together episodes of all of this. Welcome, number one.
Thank you.
How was that experience?
Heather, it was so interesting because you step onto this massive set where they have the police station, they have the morgue, they have the interrogation room, and it seems familiar, but also different in that something about it, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I stepped onto that office, seeing all the desks in the office. Feels like Law and Order. Something about it, just like I can almost hear the dun-dun in the background. But I had a chance to chat with Erin Haskett. Now, she is the executive producer of the show. She worked with Lark Productions. They had to sell Dick Wolf and the people who make Law and Order on the idea of bringing the show to Canada. And basically, when they started looking at our own stories of crime in Toronto, they started realizing there is a wealth of material here. And then they joined forces. But take a look as here we are on the set of Law and Order Toronto: Criminal Intent.
Welcome to our bullpen. This is where the action happens. This is where thousands of homicide cases have been solved here.
If I go through that door.
If you go down here, this hallway leads to the longest walk and talk you will see on the show. Down through there is our pathology lab. We have a tech lab as well.
And have the slabs where people
we have
get
the
pulled
slab.
out.
We have the slab. We also have our holding cells and our interrogation rooms. But this really is the heart of where the investigation happens.
So it looks Law and Order like, but they also were telling me like there's elements of Toronto. They wanted to have kind of the brick of an old police station. You start looking on the desks and you'll see like an old Mountie statue or a Blue Jays baseball cap. So there's things that they're putting in. They want to feel modern, but they also want to look like Toronto. So if you look outside the window, and of course we're inside a studio, but there's like a matte painting of City Hall just there. And it's not any City Hall, it's our City Hall. Now, Canadian actors, Canadian cast, Canadian directors, Canadian showrunner, very Canadian. I had a chance to speak with Kathleen Monroe. She plays one of the detectives, born and raised in Toronto. Imagine what it's like growing up, watching Law and Order, watching these actors, watching like Jill Hennessy, thinking, I want to do that. That's a woman doing that job. Maybe I'll be an actor one day and be like her. And now coming home to Toronto to step into this franchise. So I asked her, and she plays Detective Bateman, right? So gets to be a police detective on Law and Order, not too shabby. What was that moment where you're thinking, okay, it's happened? Like this is that Law and Order feel. We saw a hint of it at that footage we showed you off the top, but let's have her explain.
I still think I'm pinching myself in the morning going like, this is my job, this is my job. But I think it really was, in the pilot episode, we had this walk and talk in front of City Hall. And it was myself and Aiden and Casey Collins. And there was something about being in the suits, you know, having the badges strapped on, with a long follow shot that just didn't end, and we kept, you know, talking, you know, we'd have to go back, if we messed something up, we'd have to go back to the beginning. And it was there that I was like, we're doing Law and Order.
And this is what is so interesting about this show, is that normally you're trying to hide Toronto. I mean, Toronto is booming right now. There's 18 productions happening, TV and film. Normally, it's an irritant. Like, oh, you can see the CN Tower. We got to change the angle. Toronto plays Boston. Toronto plays Chicago. Toronto plays New York City. Here we have a show Toronto was playing itself, and so the actors, I mean, the other actor, he came from Australia back to Toronto to be in this show. He says he's seen more of Toronto shooting Law and Order than he normally does. They're in Little India, they're in Chinatown, they're in Little Jamaica, they're on the harbor front. And so as opposed to what is normal for this city that is filled with foreign productions of trying to make this city look like something else, Law and Order, and especially you can see that in the opening episode, they're saying, no, we're here. And we're going to let you know that we're here.
Spotlight shines on Toronto for sure. What about not just Toronto stories, but Canadian stories? You said they had a wealth of material to work with, and I'm thinking about all the major crimes that we've covered in the news over these recent years. There's a lot there. Will we see our stories?
You will. I mean, I think, Heather, if you start to watch the show, you're going to get a sense of deja vu, because they really did go through some of the biggest stories that we have been reporting on for the past year, past decade or so. I would not be surprised to see a mayor, you know, show up, a certain infamous mayor. I mean, I got to imagine there's something like that, but I know I was talking to Sharon Lewis, who is one of the directors of the show, and she was saying these are our stories. These are Toronto stories. These are Canadian stories. You can tell that they're different. And you have to remember there are differences. They had to adjust. Our legal system is not like the American legal system. Sharon Lewis was also telling me that there's a lot of big changes in terms of, like, in Toronto, it's less about guns. Like, you look at some of the other Law & Order episodes, everything revolves around the gun, the pistol. Here, not so much. And so that allows them to dive into the psychology of the criminal, hence the name Criminal Intent. But I had a chance to talk to, as I mentioned, Sharon Lewis, so an amazing Canadian director. She shoots all over Toronto, Vancouver, New York, Chicago, a lot of American shows. She's worked on Dick Wolf shows before, but to come home and shoot Law & Order was a big deal for her. But as a black woman, she also is cognizant that our relationship and how we photograph and tell stories of policing is really different. So that is something that she was paying attention to, and she's really, I think, appreciating how the writer's room has tackled that topic for this Toronto set show. Let's take a look.
Even as a black woman, I was like, how am I going to navigate this Law and Order sort of thing, given everything that's gone on with police sensitivity and all of that? And I think that's what's changed in the scripts and what you'll see in a difference here.
So there you go, like, really interesting, because we've had kind of an evolution. We've seen even from sitcoms to procedurals that you don't want, and certainly Lewis was telling me she doesn't want to glamorize that. It's not about busting down the door. And I think that fills in with what this show is about, which is really understanding the psychology of these characters. Now, whether it has that patented kind of Law and Order feel, and if it still feels the same now with our own Canadian stories, remains to be seen, but starts airing tomorrow.